Welcome to CUNY Laureates, the show about CUNY graduates who went on to win major awards in their respective fields. On this episode, we profile another 3 Guggenheim Fellows who graduated from the City University of New York. First, Brooklyn College graduate Leonard Herzenberg helped bring order to the chaos of immunology with his invention of the fluorescence-activated cell sorter. Then, Maggie Nelson's genre-bending books were shaped by her early years in New York City and at the CUNY Graduate Center. Finally, City College alum Jeff Talman's exploration of the sound of spaces has led him from the cathedrals of Europe to the sound of creation. Have you ever wished there was some kind of machine that could organize your things for you? Well, one Brooklyn College alum certainly did, but he didn't just wish for a machine, he made one. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Guggenheim Fellow and the invention of the fluorescence-activated cell sorter. It's the 1960s, and Leonard Herzenberg is squinting into his microscope at Stanford University, attempting to distinguish different types of cells that have been stained with fluorescent chemicals. He doesn't exactly have the best vision in the world, and his eyes are getting sore. There's got to be some kind of machine that can do this, he grumbles to himself. It turns out, there just might be. He learns about a device located in a laboratory that Americans know well, Los Alamos, the birthplace of the atomic bomb. Leonard packs his things and sets off on the long trip east, into the dusty plains of New Mexico, for a date with destiny. But this wasn't Leonard's first date with destiny. He'd already had several with a young lady at his alma mater, Brooklyn College. It was there where, as a senior, he'd been asked to tutor another student named Leonore, who had fallen behind in her studies after a bout of poison ivy. Over a little bit of analytical geometry and a lot of laughs, the two students quickly fell in love. What resulted was not only a lifelong love affair, but also an enduring professional partnership, as the two of them pursued scientific careers side by side. It was a partnership that colleagues would come to lovingly call Len and Lee. Leonard graduated from Brooklyn College in 1952, and the two were married a year later. One recurring theme across Len and Lee's academic lives was a commitment to social justice, a particularly pressing concern in the fraught but hopeful years following World War II. Len attended graduate school at Caltech on one of the first National Science Foundation Fellowships, and there he and Lee helped establish a chapter of the Federation of American Scientists, in part to combat the repression and blacklisting of academics resulting from Senator Joseph McCarthy's hunt for communists in the 1950s. A few years later, in 1955, Len began a postdoctoral fellowship under future Nobel laureate Jacques Monod at the Pasteur Institute in France. Each day at lunch, Len, Lee, and the other scientists would eat together and discuss their latest findings, as well as listen to stories from French scientists who had been part of the resistance during the war. These stories of struggle against repression, both abroad and at home, reinforced in Len and Lee a commitment to the public good that would inform their later careers. Following his fellowship in France, Len served 2 years at the National Institutes of Health before taking a position at Stanford University in 1959. By this time, he was focused on the genetics of somatic cells and how those cells were involved in immune responses. In order to test cells properly, they needed to be separated into types, and that long, grueling process is what brought him to Los Alamos. Mac J. Fulwiler and Marvin Van Diller were looking for signs of radioactive fallout in mice cells and had developed a machine that could sort them. Cells would travel down a stream of liquid and be encased in tiny droplets, which were then directed into different containers. But the Los Alamos machine could only sort cells by size, not by the glowing fluorescent chemicals that immunologists used to label cells in the lab.
When I went to Los Alamos, I asked Fulwiler if he would consider putting fluorescence onto the machine. And Fulwiler said, well, that isn't our particular interest, and we really cannot do this. Then I asked, could he give us the plans of the machine, and I would try to get it built back at Stanford by some engineer or engineers. And he said, sure, we can give you the plans.
Back at Stanford, Len worked with engineers to create a new machine. He needed it to sort cells by fluorescence and to do it quickly. At one meeting, the engineers told me that the best they could do was to take data from about 1 million cells in an hour. This was too few to be useful, so I insisted that they either increase the speed by an order of magnitude or close the project down. At first, there was some discussion about repealing the laws of physics, but eventually an engineer came up with a solution and we were off and running again. The team prevailed and created the Fluorescence Activated Cell Sorter, or FACS. The device used precise lasers to recognize cells that were tagged with fluorescence and pick them out from among trillions. But with one solution came a new problem. The precision of the FACS required a similar precision in labeling, and fluorescence labeling was still an imperfect science. Humans looking laboriously through a microscope could spot errors, but mile-a-minute lasers could not. A major development came in 1976 when Len and Lee took a sabbatical at the laboratory of Cesar Milstein in Cambridge, England. Milstein and George Kohler had recently developed hybrid cells that could produce monoclonal antibodies, extremely precise antibodies that could target specific cells. And it just so happened that they could easily be stained with fluorescence. Len and Lee immediately realized the importance of monoclonal antibodies to the cell sorter and brought the hybrid cell technology back to America. The results exceeded expectations. By designing monoclonal antibodies that could target specific cells, those cells could be stained with fluorescence, spotted by lasers, and then sorted. The FACS was now as precise as it was fast. It quickly became an indispensable machine in laboratories around the world. Over the last 40-plus years, the FACS has been used for cancer diagnosis, HIV monitoring, and autoimmune disease monitoring. The devices have also been crucial in identifying and studying stem cells. In 2013, Dr. Irving Weissman, one of the world's leading stem cell researchers, told the New York Times, without Len, tens of thousands of people now alive would not be. The patent for Leonard's device has become one of the most valuable to Stanford University, helping to fund generations of further research. And those antibodies that Len and Lee developed specifically for sorting cells, the couple gave them away for free, with no patent, allowing labs everywhere to produce them as needed. Leonard was awarded Guggenheim Fellowships in both 1976 and 1986. In 2006, he received the Kyoto Prize, which is sometimes called Japan's Nobel. His only regret was that Leonore wasn't awarded as well. But that certainly didn't make the couple any less charitable. Len and Lee donated all $445,000 of the award to the Better World Fund, a nonprofit that supports health, education, and human rights charities around the globe. Leonard's dedication to science as a public service should serve as an inspiration to researchers and scholars everywhere. As for his machine, well, it's a nice reminder that working smarter doesn't always mean working harder. New York City has always been a magnet for the artistic class, and by the 1970s, a loose-knit group of artists and writers called the New York School had taken hold. When Maggie Nelson moved to the city in the early 90s, she was inspired by this groundbreaking group. Soon, though, her journey led her to find her own voice. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Guggenheim Fellow and her ability to transcend literary and artistic genres.
The New York School of Artists was a groundbreaking group that included people like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, John Asbury, Joan Mitchell, and many others. Artists who were creating new modes of expression in art and writing. Maggie Nelson moved to New York in 1994, jumping in at the tail end of this first wave of experimentation.
I moved to Chinatown, Lower East Side. I moved there to be a writer, and also at that time I was very interested in dance and did a lot of, I guess what they call postmodern dance. And so I wanted to be near movement research and Judson Church.
Living downtown influenced Maggie's burgeoning writing career.
The Lower East Side was the place for me to be. At that time I was mostly involved with poetry and performance. Poetry project at St. Mark's Church, which, is on 9th Street, is kind of like a temple of avant-garde and experimental literature in downtown, and I worked there for many years, and we went to events there, worked in the archives, ended up curating a Monday night series.
She also performed at the Poetry Project. This is Shiner, recorded in 2001.
I wake up growling apples and dirt, naked and stretched under a barn sky. I cannot recall how I hurt my right eye. Arch of vessels, gone grape under the lid, an army of red ants, a cast of shadows, good God.
I don't know what kind of scene you would describe it as, but it was very related to, kind of post-punk and postmodern dance and performance. And we didn't have the internet, so it was the age of the Xerox flyer and the stapled together zine book. And I would go to St. Mark's bookshop. They would take your books on consignment if you self-published them, which I did.
But there was a person that Maggie was truly drawn to.
I moved to New York, and I basically was kind of following Eileen Myles, because Eileen at that point was, really at the center of a kind of queer feminist avant-garde in literature based around the Lower East Side, where I wanted to be. And also Eileen was very hooked in with a lot of different arts and performance. So when I started taking classes with Eileen, when they were teaching just informally around the city, I met so many people in the arts and people who remain friends today, intergenerationally. So that was all really important. To me, those years in New York were where I was living the dream of the life that I wanted to have. It wasn't about money or being recognized. And I think that still is a good writing life, or art life, and art should feel like,
Eventually, Maggie enrolled at CUNY, pursuing her PhD while working at the Great Jones Cafe, which has since closed. Her thesis was called Women, the New York School and Other True Abstractions, about the women poets and painters of the New York School. It was a fresh look at these artists, focusing on women like Joan Mitchell, Alice Notley, Eileen Myles, and others, women overshadowed by the male figures like Pollock and Frank O'Hara. The dissertation was revised and became a published book.
Partly why I wanted to stay in New York and be at CUNY was that all of my subjects, hence the New York School, New York was very central to that research topic. CUNY was everything. It was so great. It was fantastic. Just deciding to go there was really important to me because I lived in New York for quite some time. There was just nothing stodgy about it. The people who I studied with, a lot of them had the kind of careers that I wanted, and it was important to me to stay in the city and to be part of the city life, as it were. So it was the perfect decision, and made me the kind of writer I am today. When you're at CUNY, and you get a teaching job as a graduate student, you get a list. You want to teach at Staten Island, Brooklyn, the Hunter. You already know that you're in a network, and you're also in a network with a social history about tuition and the value of public universities. You're in a network about the social and about why all of that matters. And to me, that is the best place to develop oneself and community.
Maggie Nelson has published upwards of 10 books. They range from books of poetry to a memoir about the man who murdered her aunt. But she became more renowned for the genre-bending works like The Argonauts, which melded memoir, theory, and motherhood into a book that won the National Book Critics Award for Criticism in 2015. She won a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2010 and the MacArthur Fellowship in 2016.
Putting forward my thought process is what I'm putting forward. It's about asking good questions and then throwing all of your thought process about how you wrangled with those questions. Annie Dillard taught this. Annie Dillard has a quote. She says something like, spend it all, don't save it for later. Don't put in your drawer the thing you think is so special. So I think that notion of not being precious, not holding anything back, is really, and trusting that more will come later is a real ethos that I've always really respected.
The pages that follow do not diagnose a crisis of freedom and propose a means of fixing it or of fixing us, nor do they take political freedom as their focus. Instead, they bear down on the felt complexities of the freedom drive in 4 distinct realms.
Her book from 2021, On Freedom, explores freedom from 4 quadrants: art, drugs, sexuality, and climate change.
Myself as a writer, I'm very focused on the problem of that book. Sometimes in literature, like I said before about coming up with good questions, sometimes that process of just clarifying the problem is good enough. It's not like, how do we become free? It's like, look at this knotted nest of urges towards freedom and obligation that pull at us all the time. It's no wonder we can't solve the problem of freedom, because that's not the human condition. I often have a kind of keyword idea like freedom or cruelty or the color blue. It'll start to direct, kind of like the way when you fall in love, every song on the radio starts to sound like it was written for you and that person. Like when I have a keyword kind of flushing my life with its color, everything seems like it's related to it. I'll start gathering things. I'll start clipping articles. I'll start marking passages. It's a fascinating way to go through a few years. I recommend it. It keeps your curiosity alive, because instead of the world just being a wash, you're kind of on the hunt, My first few jobs in academia proper, which was a year I took at Wesleyan in the English department, I was spooked, because I was like, I'm not going to like being an academic. This just isn't for me. I just want to be a writer, living that life, whatever that means that I am in academic life. But I do have a scholarly bone, clearly. I knew I wanted to teach, but I thought, let's see what the art school context is like.
And now, Maggie teaches writing at the University of Southern California.
I have a poetic series called The Canal Diaries about the Gowanus Canal in Brooklyn. I lived there for a short period of time. I would just go down to the Gowanus Canal in the morning and the night and just scribe everything that was happening at the canal. And, it's like all writing is the power of your attention. Scribing is a way to make literal the power of your attention, noticing. And once you start noticing, the world becomes a much more interesting place. I always feel like with books, you just burn out whatever you were curious about, you just burn through it. It's like there was a big pile, you lit it, you burned it, and it's not like you solved it, but you're like, there's nothing left there. Time to move on. That's a pile of ashes, and then you just turn out, and then you just start making your next pile.
13.8 billion years ago, the universe exploded into life. And with that explosion came the sound of creation. This is the story of a CUNY graduate who became a Guggenheim Fellow, who has not only tapped into that cosmic sound, but into the tones and silences in the air around us that, on close listen, create a music unique to the world of sound.
Sound and space are dependent on each other. They both suggest and are dependent on time. Even the voids of outer space carry the 13.8 billion-year-old imprint of the Big Bang. But then the voids of space, on which sound is born, are not voids. They are the negative space, the negative stuff, the negative sound, no less than the air we breathe, the counter to and on which the object sounds of the world sound and resound.
For Jeff Talman, chasing the primal sounds in the spaces around us has become his artistic calling. Cathedrals, forests, fields, the cosmos. He has touched on them all. But before becoming what is called a resonant composer, Talman pursued the more traditional path of the musician, conductor, and classical music composer. Raised in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Talman took piano lessons and taught himself guitar as a young boy, joined a rock band, and programmed computers and played synthesizers before moving to New York to enroll in music at City College. Thinking he would pursue classical music, he paid out of pocket for lessons with Jan Meyrowitz, a German composer and CUNY professor who was forced to leave Germany in the 1930s.
He taught me how to be a composer in those 2 years, the foundations, a really disciplined Germanic foundation.
Talman learned classical music principles and conducted some programs at CUNY. He then enrolled at Columbia University for more music training and conducting. But after graduating and trying to start a classical music career while working as an engineer in music studios, he found himself stuck.
I sort of hit a log jam in '95, and I thought, I really need to change this, but I don't know how.
With his girlfriend, he moved to Europe.
We sold pretty much everything we owned, and we went to Prague, and that changed my life also.
Talman visited St. Vitus Cathedral, a 700-year-old Gothic structure in Prague, and found himself repeatedly drawn to the cavernous space.
I found myself going back and just sitting there, but partly I was thinking about what am I going to do with my work? How am I going to make this work? And I thought, what? I'm hearing something in here, but it's so faint, I'm not sure what it is. I went back day after day, and I'm like, that sounds like it's around 3 kilohertz. There's like a frequency up there. But it was really kind of off and on. It was really, really dim. But I could hear something there. I said, well, it should be in other places then. If it's here, let me go to other churches, big rooms, museums, wherever there's a big room that's quiet.
Talman crisscrossed Europe to visit the cathedrals in Cologne, Florence, Seville, and Cordoba. Hearing sound and looking at the spectrograms of the audio in these massive spaces gave him a hint as to what to do.
That was sort of the impetus for what became my work.
He came back to New York with new ideas about sound. He was given access to a church in Little Italy.
There was a kindly priest there who gave me time in Old St. Patrick's Cathedral to make experiments. I went in and I recorded, and I came back and I looked at it on the computer, and there was a high frequency. And it was intermittent. It was what I had been hearing. Even then, I didn't know how I could use it completely. It was just a phenomena.
In 1999, he went back into an older recording he had done at Columbia University and searched for the silence in between the music.
I found 1.1 seconds of silence in there in the space. I analyzed it, and right away I could see some frequencies in it, and I made sure they weren't aligned with electricity. So I said, okay, I think I have something here.
Talman opened up this frequency to make it more resonant and bigger, but still an accurate version of the sound of the space.
And as soon as I heard the sound, I started crying. I mean, it was emotional. Because I thought, I can use this. This is beautiful. I thought, I've got the ticket. I can make harmonies out of these. I can control the bandwidth. I now have a musical sensibility of how to work with this.
Eventually, his first installation, Vanishing Point, where the sound of St. Paul's Chapel at Columbia University fed back into itself, went up in late 1999.
I had 8 speakers up in the dome, and I was using the floor system, which was many speakers, 14 speakers, and I had others in space, but really those 14 were feeding in a panning of the sound up to the dome. When I moved the sound like that, it was volcanic. It just seemed like this giant volume of sound moving up through space, a sound mass, really a giant sound mass. And then I would have the sound seem to fall back slower like this. And I did that over and over again. This upward and cascading.
After the success of his first installations, he went back to Europe in 2003.
So I went from city to city to city, going to cathedrals, going to synagogues, to temples, large spaces, museums, castles, and I recorded in all these spaces. I started to understand spaces really well, and I started to understand how to hear them when I walked into them.
His career as an ambient sound composer took hold. He created site-specific works that took the sound of a space and amplified it. Indoor installations followed in Chicago, Cambridge, Italy, Cologne, and elsewhere. These compositions found him acclaim, and in 2006 he was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship. His life as a resident composer, writing music of and for spaces, began. But Talman was thinking even bigger. His interest moved from interior spaces to the sounds of nature. One of these was the 2005 piece, Breath Sky. In 2019, he worked with cosmologist Dr. Mark Whittle on the sound of creation, a primordial sound from 13.8 billion years ago, on a project called Of Sound Before the Stars.
There was so much force in that sound that it moved matter. Because there's so much matter and it's cooling, the force of the sound helped to coagulate the materials into the early stars and galaxies. So sound actually is at the beginning of the formation of the universe as we know it. And today, scientists can look at the cosmic background radiation and they can see imprints of those sound waves. And from those, they can model that sound.
The installation was presented at Mount Wilson Observatory in 2019.
I mean, we couldn't fit a single sound wave in the space. We couldn't even fit it on the planet, right? But through modeling, you can make it, and then you can reduce it by transposing it up so that we can actually hear our version of what it would sound like.
Another installation took place at St. Peter's Church in Manhattan in 2018. Under the Sun was a collaboration with astrophysicist Daniel Hoover that took helioseismic observations of the sun and were converted into human-level audio. Talman created an audio plan in the church and even installed speakers in the catwalk.
The sun and other stars have a lot of chaos going on, so they're roaring. They've got their own sounds, their own kind of atmosphere, and so they're very loud. And we can track those sounds through modeling the light itself. The light comes in and has the information we need to see what the sounds are like.
Back on Earth's surface, Talman continues to install audio in galleries, even next to the ocean, furthering his fascination with spatial audio first discovered in the massive cathedrals of Europe.
I'm fascinated by human contact with space. For me, it's like I walk into a great building and it's got a great lobby and I want to put sound in it. I have an extraordinarily lucky life that I've been able to do these things. You confront space and you confront the places we live in, and they're from small to large. I have a gravitation to the large ones because I grew up that way. I guess maybe I'm seeking my roots in a sense by doing it. It's something primal.